This is ILTV on the hour, bringing you the biggest stories from Israel and the Middle East. It's currently 2 p.m. here in Israel and 7 a.m. in New York City. I'm Kalev Ben David, and today is day 671 of the war in Gaza. Prime Minister Netanyahu will convene the Israeli Security Cabinet at 6 p.m. this evening to approve new war plans that will reportedly call for a full IDF takeover of the Gaza Strip. Now, this will be a phased plan carried out over 5 months to take control of the remaining areas of Gaza still held by Hamas, and will require the displacement of around 1 million Palestinians from those combat areas. Now, this will begin with the IDF taking over Gaza City and refugee camps in the central Gaza Strip, driving about half of the enclave's population towards the Mawasi humanitarian zone in the south. Netanyahu is reportedly set on moving forward with the option of full occupation, despite concerns expressed by the military leadership. IDF Chief of Staff Eyal Zamir is said to be suggesting a more gradual approach, limited at first to the encircling of Gaza City. It is expected to be a tense session this evening, lasting hours, with military officials, including Zamir, expecting to warn the cabinet taking over of Gaza may lead to heavy Israeli casualties. IDF officials reportedly told the cabinet this week that dozens of soldiers could be killed and a large number wounded in the operation. There is also concern that conquering all of Gaza may pose a danger to the remaining hostages, because until now, the army has refrained from knowingly operating in areas where they are believed to be held. They are also concerned that hostages could be executed by their Hamas captors if the IDF approaches the spots where they are being held. Now, ahead of the meeting with the cabinet, Prime Minister Netanyahu met with opposition leader Yair Lapid to brief the Yesh Atid party head on the Gaza war plans. Former Prime Minister Lapid had this to say.
אני לא נוהג לחלוק מידע מתוך דיונים עם ראש הממשלה, אבל אמרתי לראש הממשלה עכשיו, כיבוש עזה זה רעיון רע מאוד. לא יוצאים במדינת ישראל למלחמה, אלא אם כן רוב העם מאחוריך, ועם ישראל לא מעוניין במלחמה הזו. אנחנו נשלם עליה מחירים כבדים מדי, גם בחיי אדם, גם במיליארדים מכספו של משלם המיסים הישראלי. במקום כיבוש מיותר וסיפוח מיותר של עזה, אנחנו צריכים להכניס את מצרים לעזה, שיש שם שלטון אחר שינהל את עזה במקומנו, ואז להתפנות לדבר החשוב שזה חיסול החמאס. זה ייקח זמן. כיבוש עזה זה רעיון רע מבצעי, זה רעיון רע ערכית, זה רעיון רע כלכלית.
Now, part of Israel's Gaza plan includes dramatically increasing the amount of humanitarian aid going in. Aircraft from the United Arab Emirates, Jordan, Germany, Belgium, and France airdropped 107 pallets of aid over the past 24 hours and nearly 900 aid packages since July 26, when Israel eased restrictions on aid. Nearly 1,000 aid trucks have entered Gaza through the Rafah border crossing into Egypt over the past 2 weeks. Now, that number was provided by the Egyptian Red Crescent Society, which held a press conference at the Rafah border, where they noted that the trucks carrying some 15,000 tons of aid had entered Gaza from Egypt over the past 2 weeks. Meanwhile, the families of hostages and their supporters took to the streets of Tel Aviv, demanding for there to be an immediate hostage deal, as Israel is on the brink of deciding if they should take over all of Gaza by expanding the war. Now, the protest started outside IDF military headquarters in Tel Aviv and spread to nearby Hostages Square, with hundreds of protesters taking over the streets, pleading for the 50 hostages, 20 of them believed to be alive, to be released from captivity. Now, this comes on the heels of 2 devastating and horrifying propaganda videos released by Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad that show hostages Ram Braslavsky and Evyatar David in severe condition, emaciated, thin, starved, and emotionally shattered. David was forced to dig his own grave in a narrow tunnel. As I said, 20 of the hostages are still believed to be alive, but taking over all of Gaza would mean operating in those areas where hostages are believed to be located. Here are remarks from 2 of those protesting outside IDF headquarters in Tel Aviv.
I'm here, as I have been at every single demonstration since October 7th, to support the hostage families. I have a connection to several of the hostages, but I'm here for all of them, all 50. We're especially desperate at the moment. Tomorrow the cabinet is meeting, not to discuss how quickly they can return our hostages, not to discuss how dire is their situation after we've seen them starved and skeletal, but rather to discuss the Prime Minister's plan to occupy Gaza even further and to continue with the war.
We need your help to make this decision be made right now. We need your help that this time all 50 hostages will be released, because a month later, just a year ago, my family member was executed by Hamas terrorists. She did nothing wrong. She had dreams to fulfill. She had a family who's mourning. Evyatar's family, Rom's family, can still get Evyatar and Rom back. Evyatar can still play the guitar just like every other 24-year-old guy. His mother, who's getting crazy knowing that her son is being starved at the moment, that he's in the risk of his life.
Now, talks between Israel and Hamas completely broke down a week and a half ago after officials expressed optimism about the results for months. Meanwhile, Hamas came to the table with more demands, with officials believing Hamas does not want a deal. Rather, they want the international community to pressure Israel into ending the war. Now, after Hamas stalled talks in Doha, immediate reports followed of starvation and hunger inside of the Gaza Strip. Well, joining us now for more on the Gaza situation are here in Israel, Middle East expert Avi Melamed, and from the U.S., from Washington, D.C., retired Army Colonel Rich Outzen, a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. Avi, let me start with you. We've heard some of the concerns about this plan to fully take over Gaza. How is the cabinet? Let's talk about how they are going to weigh the benefits. What are the benefits of that move against some of these potential risks?
Hello, Kalev. Thank you for having me. It's a good question. What is the benefits? To be honest with you, I'm struggling, like many other Israelis, to understand exactly what are the benefits of something like that, because I don't see such. From every possible perspective that I'm looking at that step, I think that step is not going to provide Israel with any benefits. And I wonder if those doubts are being reflected in the government meeting. I'm not so sure.
All right, let me go to, first of all, Rich, I want to get your response to also to that. And also, I want to get more of your view on what on the Trump administration's attitude, because it seems a little mixed. President Trump said it's up to Israel. It wasn't a ringing endorsement, but at the same, he made clear he was not going to put the brakes on Israel. Other officials like Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, speaking more firmly about the need to destroy Hamas. So let me get your reaction to those two questions.
Right. Well, it's good to be here with both of you. I agree that the logic of the plan is not clear to me. We've heard discussion. A new occupation would involve maybe 5 divisions for 5 months or some variation on that. As a retired military officer, my question always is, to what end? What is the political goal of having 5 divisions in Gaza for 5 months or for any period of time? It can be effective. It can be useful. If there's a political status quo that's achieved at the end of that, that is better for the people of Gaza and better for the interests and security of Israel. Yet that is the continuing complaint from Washington with regards to Israeli strategy in the Gaza war, is the lack of a political end state that is both feasible and linked clearly to the military steps. Now, in terms of President Trump's view, look, it's a very interesting combination, because he's clearly very pro-Israel, pro-U.S.-Israel alliance, and very much concerned for both the hostages and the security of the state of Israel. At the same time, he's a deal maker at heart, and he also has a revulsion against the continued privations of the people and the war. So he wants those to end. I think he's torn here. He really wants to see this come to an end, but he also does not want to see a bad deal for Israel, so that the best he can do is to pump more humanitarian assistance and press Israel, whatever path it takes, to make sure that the humanitarian concerns and the well-being of the Gaza civilians are kept top of mind.
Well, gentlemen, and I'll start with Avi. What we have heard from Prime Minister Netanyahu and some other of the ministers in the cabinet are that the goal here is twofold. First of all, let's start with the first one, to pressure Hamas to reach a deal, even that preliminary deal of, for example, a temporary ceasefire, release of, say, half of the hostages, feeling, at least in the Netanyahu government, that without additional pressure on Hamas, even the threat, even if it's more of a tactic, the threat of this full takeover will move to press Hamas. What is your view on that and how Hamas would likely react to this?
I think that that decision will play to the hand of Hamas, and I will explain it very shortly in two perspectives. One, Hamas is going to monetize it for its PR. We are going to see much more of the campaign. Already Hamas started a couple of days ago, already reaching out to international community and different circles, and basically Hamas know that he's going to monetize a lot from that. This is one thing. We have to remember, Hamas doesn't care about the Gazan people. As far as Hamas is concerned, they can go all to hell because Hamas leaders are saying that. What Hamas benefit from that situation is that Hamas can continue and market its slogan of resistance. It's basically image of a freedom fighter that has been fighting for 2 years against this mighty power called the State of Israel. So when I look at it from the perspective of Hamas, I think that Hamas is quite welcoming the Israeli move because it's going to play to the hands of Hamas.
Right. Rich, again, your response to that. But also I want to, Avi touched on the humanitarian issue. And actually, in his remarks, President Trump there did say that the U.S. wants to see this improved, expanded. Again, part of the, I guess, claims by those pushing for this offensive is that in order to expand that humanitarian distribution system in Gaza, you will need more IDF forces there to establish some of these centers in areas where they have not been able to be set up. What do you think of that?
Well, I think that's clearly the essential task with regards to ending Hamas's rule over Gaza. You can't just do it by submitting them, right? By pounding them until they say, okay, we give up. They're not going to do that. The political economy, as social scientists would call it here, the linkage of the distribution of goods with political power is what has kept them in power. The Gazan people may not love Hamas. They don't in most cases. But as long as they control the distribution of aid and the territories in which the aid is distributed, then we're going to have a problem, and Hamas is going to be able to continue to extort money and to control sort of the sensitive areas of Gaza. There has to be a physical separation, and that's why I actually do think that IDF occupation, if it is designed at putting control in the hands of people other than Hamas, technocratic Gazans, maybe tribes, somebody else, but there has to be portions, large portions of the Gaza Strip that are out of the power of Hamas in terms of their ability to kill people and to distribute that aid. If that's what this plan leads to, that's fine, because then you see a new political economy emerge in which there's new power brokers and Hamas gradually loses control of the population. Until that part is done, simply distributing aid and having a presence without that sort of sanitization of where Hamas actually operates and controls merely prolongs the conflict. It doesn't bring a political change any closer.
Avi, I do want to go back to your comments on Hamas, because there have been some reports of, for example, other elements, leadership officials of Hamas outside the Gaza Strip report those that are based in Turkey are pressing the what's remaining of the so-called military wing in Gaza to reach a deal. We know that there's more pressure being put in Qatar signing that statement, which was put out by the Arab League. I mean, has there been a separation completely in Hamas now between what remains of that military wing in Gaza and the outside leadership based in places like Qatar and Turkey?
Well, Kalev, Hamas has traditionally 5 centers of power within Hamas. Some of them are here, meaning the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, the Israeli prisons in Israel, and the other are abroad, as you mentioned, Turkey, Qatar, and other places. There has always been this power struggle and tension between these different centers of Hamas power. The bottom line is that we hear that constantly since day one of this war about the different push and shove within Hamas itself. In the end of the day, it's irrelevant because The final decision is being done on the ground in Gaza Strip, and Hamas, as of now, and the further I can see down the road, still has the ability to continue and to function as a guerrilla warfare in Gaza Strip. And as far as Hamas is concerned, at least its military leaders in Gaza Strip, Azadin al-Qassam, remember, Hamas is still functioning two divisions, roughly speaking, that are now based in the area of Gaza City, the area of Mawasi, the area of the central camps in Gaza Strip. These are still significant power that is holding on. As far as Hamas is concerned, the military leaders of Hamas, in the end of the day, are the one that making the call. With all the respect to other leadership of Hamas, either they are located in the prisons or in the West Bank or abroad in Turkey or Qatar.
Right. And I want to go back to the humanitarian aid situation and international pressure. You both have alluded to it. Rich, you're based in the U.S., so you have a better perspective on how the impact that's been having there, including in Washington, even among supporters of Israel and in the administration, among Republicans. I think the concern in Israel would be, if they talk about this new offensive in Gaza lasting 5 months, is the support, or at least the willingness of the U.S. not to pressure Israel to stand down, is that likely to last over that period, over an extended period?
Yeah, I think it will last and it will get worse. I think probably the support for Israel and Israel's security is solid in most of the Democratic Party and certainly the Republican Party. But I think what you could see is growing disaffection with Netanyahu himself, because the idea that, hey, Israel has to take care of business, but this is not the way to take care of business. As you say, even among supporters of Israel, the images of emaciated babies and the continued rubble, even though there's righteous indignation about what happened on October 7th and really firm support still for Israel to take care of its people and get its hostages back, I think the idea that this can be done by inflicting long-term pain and suffering on the Gaza population so that they get rid of Hamas is reminiscent of the strategic bombing mentality of the U.S. in World War II, right, with the bombings of Dresden and Leipzig and so forth. It didn't work. It never works. So I think what you're going to see is over time, if this is a new major phase of military operations without significant change in the political dynamics within Gaza, that you're going to see an increasing criticism of Benjamin Netanyahu on sort of the idea that he's just not effective. He's extending the war without bringing it to a speedier conclusion. And even among the friends and supporters of Israel, that could lead to some increased frictions in the relationship.
Avi, you both have talked about the sort of political dimensions, and you mentioned specifically getting Arab countries involved, Egypt itself. We have seen some shift in the Egyptian position in recent weeks, opening the Rafah crossing, something they've been hesitant to do, expanding the amount of aid going in. But what would it take for the Egyptians really take, as you say, a more proactive role here? I mean, some of the Arab countries have talked about the government committing itself to a Palestinian state. We know this Israeli government, this current one, is certainly not going to do it, and I'm not sure the next one would do it either. So at what point would it be possible, perhaps outside pressure from the U.S., Egypt is the second largest recipient of U.S. aid after Israel, on countries like, for example, Egypt, even the Emirates perhaps, and of course there's Qatar, to be involved more in settling, in creating some kind of alternative political framework to Hamas in Gaza?
Well, Kalev, recently Hamas has openly, overtly, basically started in a campaign inciting people in Jordan and Egypt. Actually, Hamas recently made a statement addressing the Egyptian army to basically take steps, roughly speaking. That has been translated in the minds of the Egyptian government and the president as almost an open call of Hamas for the people in Egypt to rebel against the regime in Egypt. And obviously you can understand it's very concerning as far as Egypt is involved. Why do I say that? Because it's very likely to expect that if there is going to be an increasing and deepening Israeli military move in the shape of this occupying Gaza, or whatever the name is going to be titled with, what we'll see is inevitably the increasing challenges in Gaza Strip, the dire situation. We have to remember the Arab world is exposed daily to these scenes coming from Gaza Strip, whether they are staged or not, it's totally irrelevant. And so the meaning of that is that there is going to be an increasing pressure also on those regimes, and particularly if we are talking about Egypt. Now, it could reverse back, or it kind of like could boomerang, sort of speaking, in the sense that it will result in an increasing pressure of the United States on Netanyahu's government to move towards conclusion of that thing and not to let it linger forever and ever. So we may witness an interesting process where, as an outcome of a dynamic of deterioration on the ground with an Israeli deepening military action on the ground, we may witness simultaneously or parallel to that growing pressure within, for example, you mentioned Egypt, which is of course very significant, and that could in its turn result in a situation where the American administration will have to step in much more robustly and basically says to Netanyahu, you should move towards concluding this thing one way or another, because lingering that situation is basically a recipe for an increasing turbulence, not only in the context of Gaza, but regionally as well.
Well, let's go talk about the administration's role. Rich, it seems like a long time ago, but there was a time President Trump was basically talking about the U.S. taking almost a leadership role in Gaza, even making it some kind of, I don't know how you would call it, a U.S. protectorate or something. I mean, we don't hear that much talk often, but at the same time, we do see the U.S. Through the GHS, Gaza Humanitarian Funding, U.S. Taking a more and more active role in Gaza. We just saw Steve Witkoff making his first visit down there at those centers. So where does that stand now? Is that still a viability at some point? Or is that gone? Is that basically that idea has been gone with the wind?
Yeah, well, so part of the art of the deal for President Trump and his longstanding approach to problems is reframing the problem. And for a long, long time, Gaza has been seen as insolvable because of the dynamics of Hamas control and sort of the bitter animosity towards Israel in Hamas, among the Hamas leadership, their uncompromising stand, but also just the security dynamics. So I think President Trump, when he was talking about Riviera on the Mediterranean and so forth, was really trying to reframe the problem set and say that some sort of compromise solution, hopefully in a post-Hamas scenario, where some kind of technocratic government is there, could actually lead to good economic outcomes for the people of Gaza, as well as peace in general for Israel and the Palestinians in Gaza. So I don't think that he ever had a specific proposal tied to that. What he was trying to do was indicate negotiations rather than war are the way to go, because there are creative permutations that could be pursued. I think that logic is still there. As for the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, look, very shortly after October 7th, there were several moves afoot in the United States to develop something like this, because the idea, and we've lived through this in Iraq, and we've lived through this in Afghanistan, once an outside power, and that's what Israel is in Gaza, and we were in Iraq and in Afghanistan, once you try to change the government or to change the political dynamics of a country, it is absolutely essential not to be seen as the oppressor of the people. The people may love you or hate you as an external power, but they have to essentially blame the current management of that area if they want to change it. You simply can't do that through imposing pain on the people, right? There has to be some better alternative. And that's why this movement that's actually now over 2 years old, to increase the flow of humanitarian aid, but also to divorce it from Hamas's control. Right. That, in the American view, is the key to victory. And I think that's essential. That's when Secretary Rubio talks about aid, when we talk about that with allies as well. That is, whatever the military strategy, it will fail if it does not have the proper humanitarian dimension, because in Gaza, the humanitarian is political. And if you don't have a political strategy for how this ends, then you're simply not going to end it.
All right. And finally, Avi, I want to bring it to maybe the most pressing issue in the minds of most Israelis, of course, the fate of the remaining hostages, the 20 or so believed to be alive. Some concern about whether this offensive could put them into danger. Again, there are others who say it's the only way to as a tactic to try to reach a deal to get them out. I mean, what are your feelings, your thoughts towards the hostages now as we are at this critical junction?
Well, as I'm analyzing the decisions of the government since the beginning of the crisis and the different steps taken and the sort of like strange dance back and forth, sort of speaking, of the government, I'm afraid that the only conclusion that I come to in the context of the hostages is that the hostages are not the first priority of this government. I think it's a conclusion that it speaks for itself. It's very clear. It's self-evidenced by the actions of the governments, and particularly the thing the government did not do. Therefore, I think that there is a very good reason to be very much concerned about the fate of the hostages. This concern is clearly reflected by the military, by the chief of staff to the government. Nevertheless, it seems like that the government is insisting to continue its line, and according to that line, to the best of my reading, against self-evidence, it's very clear that unfortunately the hostages are not the first priority.
Rich, I have 30 seconds if you have anything to add to that.
No, I think it's an important act of conscience, the continued protests to keep the hostages top of mind. I lived in Israel for 4 years while I was with the U.S. government, and I know how deeply these issues are felt in Israel. It's a small country. At the end of the day, it is family. Everybody has connections to those folks, and I am very impressed that people have not simply thrown up their arms at that, and I hope that the government and security cabinet are listening to that.
All right, Rich Outzen, Avi Melamed, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us. Bye-bye.
Now, as the IDF gears up for the Gaza offensive, its first regular company of new ultra-Orthodox Hashmonaim Brigade has completed its 7 months of combat training. The 50 Haredi troops entered Western Wall Plaza in Jerusalem's Old City at the end of their final march into the Israeli capital. Soldiers entering the plaza blew shofars and prayed together with their families and officers. The march started in the hills of Jerusalem. This follows months of intensive training. The Hashmonaim Brigade is the IDF's first fully Haredi unit, structured in a way that will allow troops to serve without compromises to their religious way of life. Now, the ongoing dispute over the issue of deferments for yeshiva students is still playing out in the political sphere, with the new head of the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, the Likud MK Boaz Bismuth, trying to pass a new enlistment law that would meet the recruitment needs of the IDF while leaving the shaky coalition in power. The ultra-Orthodox parties, Shas and United Torah Judaism, resigned last month from the government over the issue, but continue to support it in the Knesset. Well, let's turn now to economic news. New U.S. tariffs that cover most of the globe kick in today, and that includes a 15% levy on Israeli goods. President Trump has pushed for the tariffs, arguing they will counter unfair trade practices by other countries and encourage manufacturing in the U.S. Talks between Israeli and U.S. officials have taken place in recent months in a bid to reduce the rate to a baseline of 10%, but there was no agreement from Washington. Now, the 15% rate is below the 17% that was initially announced by Trump, before Trump put a 90-day freeze on the tariffs in a bid to negotiate better trade deals for the U.S. The impact on Israeli tech exports is expected to be limited because the tariffs do not apply to export services, but physical goods, mainly machinery and industrial equipment, will be affected. Now, the U.S. imported $22.2 billion worth of goods from services from Israel last year. That's $7.4 billion more than it exported to Israel. Finally, some weather news. Israel is heading into an extreme hot wave, and I mean extreme, not seen in nearly a century. Beginning tomorrow, Israel is set to enter an intense and prolonged heat wave, with the peak forecast for Saturday and Sunday, with temperatures in the Jordan Valley expected to reach 48 degrees centigrade or 118 degrees Fahrenheit. The worst of the heat is expected to hit the country's inland areas. Meteorologists say that Jerusalem could see temperatures of up to 40 degrees centigrade or 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, along the coast, it will not be quite as hot with some sea breezes coming in, but the combination of high humidity and heat will make for extremely uncomfortable conditions across the coastal plain and lowlands. So if you're living here, make sure your air conditioning or fans are working, and please drink plenty of water. Hydrate. Well, that's it for this edition of ILTV on the Hour. We'll continue giving you the most important updates coming from Israel and the Middle East. But for now, you can keep up with us on our ILTV app, or just scan the QR code on your screen. I am Kalev Ben David. This is ILTV News, and thank you for watching.